Assalamu alaikum.
Recording in progress.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Ibrahim Moibi, and I'm a member of Group 11, EDFS 1001. And below are my fellow group members, Nur Alin, Nur Nadwa, and Asila. So today, I would like to present on the Malaysian education system from the 1970s. So I would like to give a brief overview, somewhat of an intro. So let's have a background where it all started from, the educational system itself. So before the independence, actually, even before the colonization of the British, education in Malaysia was such that it was informal education. It was more or less just basic survival skills like fishing, farming, and whatnot. So with Islam coming to Malacca and the Sultan over there converted to Islam, so we see how they say somewhat the birth of formal education, whereby there's a madrasa, or mostly best known as Sukola Agama and all that. So then we move forward towards the colonization by the British. So that's when the formal education truly began. But the problem with during the British era is that most Malaysians then is either they were going to religious schools or they were farmers at the time. The British people, they had their own English schools. Same goes with the Chinese and the Indians. Everything was segregated at the time. So for for the Chinese people, the British actually saw the potentials. They are, how to say, they're very good at doing business. So then it was Chinese that were ruling the country economically. So so that's just a brief overview of how it was right before the independence. So now we move towards post-independence. So once Malaysia gained their independence, there was a notion to revamp the whole educational system as a departure from British colonial system. So at this stage, the main focus was unity. So here, a unified Malay curriculum was introduced with the medium of instruction being Bahasa Melayu, thus having a unified educational system. There was a shift towards instilling value in youth so as to eradicate the remnants of segregation during the colonial era, with the main aim of creating unity in the notion, creating youth who are morally upright. So here, basically, so before the 1970s, where the educational system was fully reformed, so it was focused mainly on instilling values, people who are morally upright. People, how do I say it? The economy was coming up, but it wasn't as drastic of a change as it was from the 1970s. So how do I say it? The educational system was quite at its rudimentary stage. It has not really have the solid foundation as it did in the 1970s. So these are the few trends in the educational sector up to the 1970s. In the 1970s educational reform, the main goal was just unity uh, in Malaysia, and the teaching methods were in the sense that it was such content-based and teacher-centered. People studied based on exams, and values were taught separately according to one's belief. So these values being taught separately, so that's what those were, how would I say it? Yes, the curriculum might still be under one, being Malay only, but when it comes to belief, like they have their separate subjects for values and all that. So Indians, whatever religion they practice, Muslims used to be called agama, then they start learning Islamic studies, Chinese people too, and whatnot, according to their belief. And education then was very like mentioned, it's very content based. So people don't really reflect on what they actually learn, you know. They just go to class, cram what they have to cram. Once it's time for exam, they write it and just hope for the best to get good grades. So coming to the 1970s, there was a major revolution of the educational system and drastic changes were made. KBSR and KBSM were introduced under the Ministry of Education, with Tun Dr. Mahathir being the Minister of Education at the time. So Mahathir was such a person that even way before his time as the prime minister, he actually had a vision, that it will be through this educational sector that the economy of Malaysia will really go up and be what it is today. So therefore, it only went for not instilling value, but also having a human resource development. It went from teacher-based to student-based learning where individuals benefit from knowledge and be morally sound. And this was known as the holistic method. So it's kind of a full circle educational system. So moving on to move the main objective was to move on with the times, to contribute to the human capital for the economy. More vocational schools were introduced with the aim of creating youth who are skilled and contribute more to the economy. So aims and objectives of the reform in the 1970s. The educational reform had a few main objectives. So the main objectives is kind of, how do I say it? It's literally the new economic policy. Like, the government decided, okay, this is what we're going to do, and these are the plans moving forward. So the first point here is one of the paramount targets at hand is to have an holistic educational system, as I mentioned before, where a person is not only morally sound, but also skilled. In other words, to create a complete individual who has high integrity and can contribute positively to the society, to create a system whereby obtaining education is not only about exams, but also how the knowledge can be beneficial for an individual. In short, the main objective was for it to be student-centered learning. So how can one actually, benefit from the knowledge? How can he contribute to the society, benefiting him, benefiting everyone? So, like I said before, a holistic uh, educational system. And the last but not least, to also cope with the economic situation, because the economic situation, frankly speaking, in the 20th century was not really good. So they had to use different strategies, and the educational system in Malaysia seemed to be their greatest strength. So there's a vision whereby education will be used as a means to boost the economy, to boost the economy and meet the developmental needs and goals of the country. So in implementing this process, there are, of course, hurdles along the way. There are a few challenges. So here are the few challenges that were faced. Prior to the 1970s reform, teaching methods were known to be in a way bland, quote and unquote, and heavily content-based, with having little to no attention paid to the students. So one of the main hurdles the government has was reorienting the mindset of the teachers and students alike. So with this, they recruited people from overseas to train their teachers to adopt new teaching methods. So the second point is that there's a heavy emphasis on exams. Like I mentioned before, um, because before the 1970s educational reform, it was heavily content-based. So it's just cram and write, It was exam-based, and in the end, once they do the exam, they won't really reflect on the knowledge. In short, it was kind of like, wasting time, because the knowledge they gain is not it won't be beneficial. They don't benefit themselves. They don't benefit the society around them. makes it very redundant. So, so the government was tasked with changing this and making it based on acquiring and understanding the information obtained and how it could be practically applied in their life. The instilling of certain values. So with this, each ethnic group, of course, they have different values. So the government was tasked to, um, take different values, to find the similarities between each other, and make it universal. And thus, it was the introduction of the 16 values were there. So there were a bit of challenges at first, initially, because every individual has their own belief system, what I wouldn't say superstition, but what they really believe in and how they want to implement their values. So, like I mentioned, it being holistic, they wanted the government, they wanted all the teachers to be able to instill one of the 16 values at different levels. So this was mainly the trend up to 1990s, where there's the advent of ICT. So the KBSR, I think integrated curriculum for primary school and one for secondary school. So right up to the 1990s, the strategy was mostly integration and adjusting with the economic situation. So once the advent of technology came in 1990s, they also had to adjust their strategies, in short, moving on with the times. So moving on with the times so that they can move into a digital era up to the 21st century. So a lot of institutions were created at the time, private universities and all that, with most recently in the early 2000s, Malaysia being focused on the key economy. That'll be all for me. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And I'll pass the mic to the next person.